Welcome. My name is Paul Mitchell. I'm a professor of agriculture and applied economics at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, and this is a lecture from my course AAE 320. And the title of the lecture is Distribution of Farm Income by Farm Size and Farm Type. What I'm going to do today is go over some USDA data looking at the averages or the aggregate numbers of farm income and then notice how I want to broaden it to get to the full distribution around these averages or get some sense of the variation among farmers, mostly because we focus on these aggregate numbers or the averages, and the reality is there's a lot of farmers doing better and worse in those averages or aggregate numbers. And the sort of the side focus is on looking at what we call small farmers and see how they do relative to larger farmers, and to get a sense of, to help understand that rural poverty is a part of agriculture here in the United States. These data are from the USDA. They go from 1850 all the way up to 2017, and I'm going to focus in on the blue line, the number of farmers. And what you see there is the number of farms were kept increasing for several years there because we were settling the West. This is still the frontier days. The several states, and even the Midwest, there were new farms appearing and developing as we were establishing farms all across many of these states. Then it hit a flattening point out here in early about 1900 and kind of went flat, peaked at in 1935 at 6.8 million farms in the U.S., and then had a rapid decline until the mid 70s. And then it kind of did another bending point, or a kink, if you will. And it's kind of been on a long, slow decline since then. We're down to just a little bit over 2 million farms as of 2017. Then you look at farm income here. And what I want to notice here is this is one of these aggregate numbers. You see at 2020, the forecast as of September 2nd is a little above average, 115 billion, 103 billion, depending on which measure you're using. And we're above that long 20-year average of those dotted lines, whether you're using cash income or just farm income. And what you'll see is, okay, these farmers are doing okay this year. Well, what I want to think about now is looking at the distribution around this aggregate or these average returns per farm. But before we do that, we've got those 2 million farms. I want to think about what are they like? What are the different types there are? And these are the USDA data. Again, the link is there at the bottom. About 90% are in the small family farms. This is with gross cash income of less than $350,000. And I've got that blue box there breaking those people out. Who are those 90% of farms? 12% of the farms in the U.S. are retired farmers. 41% are off-farm occupation farms. These are people who identify as an accountant, as a school teacher, or as a truck driver, something like that. And they also have farmland. And so their primary occupation that they refer to themselves as is a non-farmer, but they also own and operate a farm as sort of their side job. Almost 41% of farms in the U.S. are one of these types of farms where they have another job as their primary source of their income and what they consider themselves as an employment. Then we have what we call farming occupation farms. We're still talking about this 90% of farms, and these are smaller operations. 37% of farms fall into this category of identifying themselves as a farmer first and foremost, but they also probably have another job. We'll see some data on that as well. But their primary occupation is, at least of the operator, is I'm a farmer. So 32% of farms in the U.S. have sales less than $150,000. And then there's another category of that farming occupation farms between $150,000 and $350,000. 5% of farms in that category, they are the last category in there of the 90% of farms that are small family farms. So you can see quite a few farms fall into that category of small farms in that blue part of the pie, or fall under small farms, and they are full-time farmers, or they consider themselves full-time farmers. Then we go up to the mid-size, large, and non-family farms there. And so the mid-size farms are family farms with cash income between $350,000 and $1 million, and that's sort of that yellow-green slice of the large family farms are greater than $1 million worth of cash revenue. Then there's a small category of non-family farms. So if you take these numbers, this means that most farms in the U.S. are family farms, 98%, or 97.1% if you want to be exact. But 98% of farms in the U.S. are family farms. And then most of these are small farms in that big, giant blue slice. Then we have these non-family farms. What this category is are non-family members working together in partnership. This would be, say, a couple non-related people. So not maybe friends or just people that work together as a family farm or as a farm. Some of them are non-family corporations that are private. And so I think both of these are non-family members working together, either as a partnership or an LLC or as a corporation. And then you've got the last two categories. There are farms hiring unrelated managers. So this might be somebody who has a full-time job or is busy or lives farther away, and they consider themselves a farmer. They own and operate a farm, but they don't actually do it themselves. They hire somebody else to manage that land for them who is not a family member. And the last one are publicly held corporations. There are some that still hold some land, think of like a seed company, might be growing seed corn, and they also grow other crops and sell those as well as sort of rotations through their seed corn industry or fields. They would be non-family farms, publicly held corporations potentially. So most of these are small farms, and 98% of farms in the U.S. are family farms. Now, what this slide here is I want to get a sense of the productivity and where the land is. We have the same categories and the same colors. Small family farms are 90%. The dark green is mid-sized family farms. That's 5.5%. Large-scale family farms are that yellow green. That's 2.7%. Then non-family farms are 2.1%. And the left side is the value of production. On the right is the land operated. And so we'll focus in on the small farms. They produce a little over 20%, so 21% of the value of all U.S. agricultural production comes from these small family farms. 90% of farmers produce 21% of the output using almost half of the land, 47.7% of the land. So you can see they're not particularly productive in the sense that they use almost half the land and only produce a little over a fifth of the output. That means they don't have the highest quality land. They maybe don't have the same capital resources, the same equipment, the same methods of management and such like that. Then I'm going to look at these other two categories, the orange and the dark green, the non-family farms and the mid-sized family farms. What you'll see is let's start with the green, the family farms. The mid-sized family farms they produce 21% of the output using 1% of the land. The non-family farms produce 12% of the output using 12% of the land, roughly. And so those farms are sort of like a one for one. They obviously have good capital and everything, have good, decent land and such. But so they use 12% of the output, or 12% of the land to produce 12% of the output, use 21% of the land to produce 21% of the output. The last category is where you really see the productivity here. These are those large-scale family farms. These are operations with more than $1 million in revenue. They use not quite 20% of the land to produce almost half of the output, 46% of the output. So 20% of the land produces 46% of the output. And that's those large-scale family farms, 2.7%. So these are the same numbers here, but all just the numerical versions of them all. And I'd like to emphasize a couple things here is these large-scale family farms. In the U.S., there's only a little over 55,000 of those farms, 2.7% of the farms. They produce almost half of the output on less than 20% of the land. That is where the productivity is. But there's a lot of people out there. You can see these categories, these farming occupation farms with the low sales and small, moderate sales. 640,000 people in that $150,000 of gross revenue or less. Another 100,000 in that 150 to 350. And then you have these mid-sized farms also at about 100,000, a little bit over. But you can see they're producing 20% of the production on 20% of the land. And so there's a lot of these farmers on that blue slice that we've been looking at, the small farms. They're not as productive, but there's a lot of them there. And then there's these larger operations, 55,454, that are producing a large chunk of our output. So now we want to look at the different types here. Across the bottom are the different types of farms, poultry and egg, hay, beef, hogs, cash grain, that'd be corn and soybeans, cotton, dairy, and then high value crops, which would be specialty crops, fruits and vegetables. In Wisconsin, it'd be cranberries, for example, and potatoes and vegetables. And then you look at the same categories here, the dark blue, dark green, large scale, and non-family. Dairy is, if you look at this figure here, is one of the most consolidated industries in farming, with almost 70%, 69% are in that large scale operations with more than $1 million worth of revenue. That means is part of the reason is because it's a high value crop or a high value operation. There's a lot of revenue generated by dairy, but it's also just highly consolidated relative to the other parts of agriculture, like cash grains. It's only 40% are in that category. There's still a third of farms are in that mid-sized, and another 21% are in that small category. And so you see, and then you go to some other ones. One of the most non-consolidated of the egg and poultry operations over here, where 56% are in that small category. So you can kind of get a sense of where the high value crops and the dairy are some of the more consolidated ones. Cotton is fairly consolidated, or some of these other ones like hay is a low cost industry. A lot of people have hay acres and produce hay. And beef is sort of in the middle there. Beef, hogs, and some of the cash grain operators are sort of in that middle where they're somewhat consolidated, but also there's room for non-large scale farms in there. Then you look at the profit margins here. These are in 2018, so it's a rougher, tighter year and thin margins for most farmers. The red means that profit margin is less than 10%. That means all the dollars that comes in as gross revenue, less than 10% is kept on the farm as profit. So go back to the mark of $150,000, that means less than $15,000 is kept on the farm as income, if you're looking at that small category. What you'll see here is it's a tight year, a lot of red. But the large and very large and the mid-sized family farms are the ones who make the most money. They have the largest green, where they're above 25% profit margins, and another category here in the 10 to 25. But even among these large and very large operations, they still have a third of them had negative margins, or not negative, I'm sorry, less than 10%. But then really among these smaller farms, of the low sales farms, 81% had profit margin less than 10%. Very few of them were actually keeping more than 10% of their income or revenue coming through as income. And so part of this is, I think, is a cost. These are periods of this 2018 is a period of low prices for a lot of commodities, animal, livestock, and crops. And what's happening is prices are low. The larger operations are lower cost farms, and so they tend, on average, to keep more of their income on the farm. The smaller operations are, on a per unit basis, per bushel of corn, per pound of beef produced, tend to be higher cost operations. So now we're going to look at the income here. Now these are in 2018, these are the operator's household income, the median, the middle one. And we got that same categories across the bottom here: retired, off-farm occupation, low sales, moderate sales. Those are our small farms. Then we have a mid-sized category. Then we have the larger operations. And so the solid line is household income, the median U.S. household income of a little over $63,000. And then the dotted line is the median household income once you include self-employment income, people with running something on the side as well. And that's slightly higher, 86,401. And then these numbers here are the average household, or I'm sorry, the median household income in thousands. So retired farmers, 53,000 is their median income, puts them below these median income for households, and even with self-employment. And some of that makes sense. These tend to be older people. They're living off of retirement income, but they aren't running as large of a household. They don't have children in their house anymore. It's often just one or two people. And so in retirement, you don't have as many costs in general. You do have medical costs, and so that's one of the things. But off-farm occupation farmers, this makes sense. These are people with other jobs somewhere else, and they also have a farm. They have, the average there is $100,000 above the median of the household income here in the U.S. Moderate sales farms are pretty close in that same category, $90,000 above the average, or right on the average, or the median, I should say. And you go up to the mid-size, large, and very large. You see some large numbers here. Household income of $746, $335, $167, more than double the household income in the U.S. almost here in these mid-sized family farms. So there's only, I'm going to go to the next slide here. This is the percent of farms in those categories, and you'll see, there's not a lot of farms in that 167, 335, and 746. But you see there's some farms in there, and they have some large household incomes. This large and very large is this newer category where they split the $1 million to $5 million in revenue. That's 2.4%. And then this very large is over $5 million in gross cash farm income. It's 0.3%, not that many farms. The only other category I've kind of glossed over is this low sales category. A third of the farms in the US, 32%, are low sales farms, and their household income, the median is $47,000, well below the median household income in the US, particularly with self-employment. These are small farms. So now we're going to look a little more closely at this. These are the same categories on the side here as you read across these rows. The first number is percent of farm households with income below the median, and then the wealth below the U.S. median. The U.S. median wealth is roughly $100,000. The median income is $63,000. And what you see is one of the stylized facts about farms is they have low income but high wealth. They have a lot of land. Land is worth money. Vast majority of farms, all these numbers are below 5%. 95% of farms have more than $100,000 worth of assets, of wealth. This would be land primarily, as well as buildings and/or machinery and livestock and grain and such. But income is low. These are retirement income. 58% of the U.S. farmers that are retired have less than $63,000 as their household income. We go to that low sales category that I've been emphasizing. 65%, 2/3 essentially, have household income below that median of 63,000. There's a lot of people in that category. That's 32%. Then you get some of these other farms in here. But the point I also want to emphasize is we go back a slide here. These are some big numbers: 746,000, 335,000 as their median household income. The reality is still 20%. A fifth of them have income in that household below the U.S. median of 63,000. So yes, the median is huge: 750,000, 335,000, but the distribution is broad. In 2018, there was still a fifth of these farmers had income below the median of 63,000. These are the same categories going across here. We're splitting income from farm and non-farm sources now. So these are the mean household income in these categories, not the median, the mean now. And then we got the amount, we're going to look at farm income and then income from off-farm sources. So you can look through this. We'll go with the low sales farms just because that's going to be our focus. But 57,626 is the average, the mean of household income, not the median, the mean. What's their income from farming? 62% of them is negative, so the average, not surprising, is below zero. $4,200 is their loss. They're losing $4,200 on average from farming. Where do they get their money from? They get 61,000, almost 62,000 from off-farm sources, both earned income and unearned income. Unearned income is things like interest and dividends from retirement systems, Social Security benefits. The other big one there is other government payments. That's where some of these other farm program payments will show up, as well as alimony, annuities, private pensions, estates, various sources of retirement incomes. But you'll see there that group is losing money as farmers, making up for it with off-farm income, but they consider themselves full-time farmers. Moderate sales farms are in the same category. They do make money as a farmer, $40,000 on average, but 24% are still negative. Their household income on average is $108,000, but the big chunk of it is coming from off the farm. $67,000, $68,000 is coming from off the farm. And so you can see there is a lot of farms in this off-farm occupation farm. These low sales farms are losing money. A lot of those farms that are making, have a real job, if you will, outside the farm, on average, their household income is $130,000. They're losing money on the farm part of their operation in 2018, which was a tight margin year. Then we'll look at these very large farms and large. Household averages are very large, of course, $400,000, $1.3 million. Those are large numbers, not the medians of 750 and 335,000. The averages are even higher. Big chunk of it's coming from agriculture. They have still, on average, typically have some income from off-farm sources, $50,000, $45,000, $50,000, $60,000. But the surprising part is 15% of them are still have negative farm income on these very large farms. They have $1 million or $5 million worth of revenue, and they're still 15% are losing money that year. So we've emphasized in this part here where you're getting how many of these farms, even with these really large averages or really large medians for these large farms, still a number of them are losing money. Even these off-farm income farms are losing money. 71% lost money in 2018 as a farmer. They were subsidizing it with their off-farm income. And then we look at this lower sales category. 62% are negative. They consider themselves as farmers' full-time job. They got some income from off farm here, a lot actually. And so they consider themselves full-time farmers and they're losing money as farmers. 32% is the farms that are $62,000 is their average off-farm income. So what I want to do now is just look at percent of operators and their spouses who work off the farm. So not surprisingly, the blue is the operator and the spouse is the red color or orange. Not surprisingly, those would consider themselves off-farm operators, that operator or the farmer or the spouse work off the farm. That's by far the largest category. But a lot of these other ones are consider themselves full-time farmers. They still have, 10 to 20% have a job the principal operator does off the farm. And then the spouses as well, about 40, 45% do. But what you'll see is, and even retirement farmers, about a fifth of them still have off-farm income from working some other job. So off-farm income is extremely important for a lot of these people. And what you'll see there then, as the larger farms, even fewer and fewer of them do take off-farm income, but their spouses stay operating with some sort of off-farm income until you get to those very large farms. That's the lowest category where most of the work is there on the farm, which makes sense. If they're having $5 million worth of revenue, it's not particularly sensible to be wasting your time, if you will, distracting yourself from the main operation to work off the farm. Reasoning is what makes sense here. We see most of these people, by a huge chunk, are working off farm, not just to earn extra income, but to get health care. A lot of these companies or organizations they work for, it's to get good health benefits. It's a pretty big stereotype where there's a man who operates a farm, makes money or doesn't make money, depending on the year and the size of the operation. But the spouse goes into town and gets a job with benefits, as a school teacher, works for the city or the state or something, or a company that has good health benefits. And now the farmer and the family operation has health insurance. Okay, so now we're going to look at the choices they make. What are these off-farm jobs? What do they tend to do? These colors are different than we've seen before. They're the same colors, but they mean different things now. The orange color is now the U.S. labor force, the typical U.S. person. Dark green is a rural residence farm, which is the off-farm occupation farm. They live in the country, have a farm, but their primary source of income is off the farm. Then these intermediate farms are going to be the small and mid-sized farms now, and then the dark blue is the commercial farms, which I'm the large and very large farms. So what do farmers do? We're going to focus in on these intermediate and commercial farms. If they're not farming for themselves, big job they often do is go work for other farmers. 15% to almost 20% of these people, if they have another job, is working for another farmer. And so that makes sense. The other big common skill set for rural residents, particularly, is in the construction industry or maintenance, extraction, mining, or something like that. And these are the people that would then have that full-time job in the dark green there, or as a part-time job for the intermediate farms, working in construction of some sort, and then they come back and farm. And again, that's 20, 25%. The other big one is trucking. This production and transportation. They're right on the average with the U.S. labor force, but of a little over 12% is working in trucking. Production, transportation, material moving things around. It's very easy as a farmer to have a semi-trailer and haul for other people, or a truck of some sort, or just drive for them. And then the other ones are some various types of professional jobs. 35% is the U.S. average in sort of management, business, financial, and professional. Is working at the bank, working at the grocery store as a manager, managing a quick trip or something like that. You can see a lot of these farms are in that category of 20, 25% for the commercial farms, a little smaller in the intermediate farms. Sales is another common one. And then, working, the stereotype is, feed or seed salesman, selling seed for a company. Pick your favorite one. You run that off your farm, or maybe, and then you do also work for them as well. Maybe travel to the main office. But there's a lot of occupations out there. This last category is all others. And there's so many of them, 20 to 25% are in these other kinds of jobs that aren't in these categories. So they're hard to categorize. But what I really like to say, what do farmers do? A big chunk of them go work for other farmers, or they work in management, professional jobs, or trucking is another good example of hauling things. The next one is distribution of government payments here. And so there's a sort of a split between these, what we'll call small farms, low sales, off-farm occupation, retirement farms, and more of these productive farms that are producing a large chunk of the output. The large and very large farms that are producing almost half of our output, and the well, the very large, but the mid-size and large really kind of emphasize that moderate middle category here versus these other operations on the side. And so what we're going to do here, the dark blue is the conservation payments. These are payments that you put your land in this program, enroll it for 10 years usually, and receive in essence, a rental payment for 10 years. And you take it out of production, put it into things like grasses of various sorts, some sort of natural system, or potentially trees. And you can see of those CRP dollars, about a quarter each go into the retired farmers, off-farm occupation farmers, and these low-sale farmers. Almost 75% of that payments for CRP are going to these small operations that are retired farmers, have another job, or are low-income farmers with like $250,000 or less. And so you think about that unearned income, CRP for these small, less than $50,000 farms is a major source of their income. And then the other farms also participate, but at much lower levels. That last 25% is scattered among all these different categories. The next category is a working lands conservation program. So these are going to be things like EQIP, Environmental Quality Incentive Program, and other programs that pay a farmer to do things like plant cover crops, install grassed waterways, buffer strips, contour the land, put in terraces, things like that. They keep the land in production, but they help it be more environmental. You can see a large chunk of those payments are going to the mid-sized large farms here, 29, 33%, another 14% are going moderate. These are the working farms out there. They tend to stay in farming, and they receive EQIP payments and other similar payments to do a little bit better job on their farm in terms of environmental impact. Commodity-related payments, these are going to be things like the ARC and PLC payments we talked about from the Farm Bill, as well as dairy margin coverage, DMC. Again, a big chunk of those payments are going here. About a third each, the large farms and mid-sized farms, and the moderate sales farms are picking up at 12%. And a few go to these very large farms and non-family farms, and there's some down here as well. But the big winners, 2/3 of them are going right here at the mid-size and large, and pick up this last category. You've got a big chunk of those Farm Bill payments are going to those farms. Then the last one is this orange, is the program crops, and this is basically where the base acres are. The crops that generate base acres are the crops these farmers plant. That's why the production is associated. The payments that are tied to production, historical production, are also the ones they get, and that makes sense. You see, again, it says mid-sized and large farms and moderate sales farms. There's not a lot of farms here. Remember, this is like 5.5%, 5.1%, 2.7%, things like that. They're not a huge number, but that's where the production is, and that's where those payments go. So the next thing I want to look at is this 57,626. Where this number comes from is going back several slides here. These are these farms here. These are these low sales farms. Their mean, or their average household income, is a little over almost $58,000. 32% of the farms in that category. They have off-farm income, most of their sources of income. They lost money in 2018 on the farm. 62% of them have negative farm income. We're going to look at those farms, and the point I'm trying to get across here is how much is this money? Young undergraduates sounds like $57,000 is a lot of money. People that are older and have raised families or in the process of raising families realize how fast that money disappears. And so we're going to stereotype here. We'll assume a family of 4, mom, pa, boy, and girl. The U.S. poverty threshold for that family unit of 2 parents and 2 children is $26,200. You would be eligible for SNAP, a Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, the old food stamps program, and free school lunches if your income is less than that, is less than $34,000. And then the last one would be if you get reduced cost student lunches. If you're at 185%, or about almost $49,000, $48,500. And really, if you go back and think about that mean was 57,626. A lot of them had negative farm income. That's the mean. There's a bunch of them below that. And the point I really want to make is many kids from small farms are going to qualify for free or reduced school lunch programs and/or food stamps. So here are the people helping raise our food, and they themselves are on low-cost student lunches for their children, and potentially even free. And some of them would even qualify for food stamps, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, so SNAP benefits. So which is kind of this ironic factor about the U.S. food and agriculture. So this is what I would call the rural poor. So what you see here is a figure of poverty rates in the US. This would be going to go back a slide here. These are the numbers of percent of the population below that 26,000 in 2020. But those numbers are indexed over time, so that as you go backwards, it would be lower levels, lower income amounts would qualify you as in poverty. So 1959 to 2016, you can see the poverty rate fell for a while there, particularly in the 60s, as we had a sort of a war against poverty, brought these rates down, but it's been fairly flat since the late 60s until now, generally in that 10 to 15%, 20% range. The other thing you'll notice is non-metro, rural poverty has always been higher than metro or urban poverty. So there are more poor people in rural areas than in urban areas. You look at it regionally, it's very clear that there are more rural poor in the South and in the West than there is in the Midwest and the Northeast. But it's not a small number, even in the Midwest here. 14% is 13, 14% are still below that poverty line in the rural U.S. Now we'll look at the poverty rates. These are an image, and you'll get this off the link there at the bottom. You can get the poverty rate by county, and these are the non-metro, the rural areas. The white areas are urban areas and don't show up because they're metro counties. You can pull those up separately if you want to go to that tool and choose different boxes. But what you'll see is, I'm going to focus on Wisconsin. We have a large part of the state in rural areas have poverty above the 10 to 20% real easily. And some are, that lighter blue. It's hard to tell the light blue from the dark blue. But there's a lot of these rural counties have, roughly about 10%, which you go back a slide here, the Midwestern poverty rate is about 14%. So that's not surprising. You go over here, this is the children, people under 18 years of age, their poverty rate. And these numbers are even higher. You see these reddish areas where there's a lot of children in poverty. And part of this is parents with young children are earlier in their careers where they make less money, but they're also, there's higher costs and everything. And it's kind of ironic that these, people with children, we have a lot of children in poverty, and those that are farmers are often can receive free and or reduced student lunches and or even SNAP benefits. So most of the focus is on the averages in farm income or the aggregate farm income. The reality is there's lots of variation around these averages and the median. And many farms do better than this average and many farmers do worse, and it varies from year to year. And really, I'd like you to think about is rural poverty rates are worse than non-rural poverty rates, metro poverty rates. But for many people in agriculture, rural poverty, low income is a reality.